Hi, it's Ty. Today I want to talk about DLC, or downloadable content. What is it, and why it's leading video game developers to giving fans unfinished games like this?
Please note that for this video, I will be focusing on Nintendo games, even though this issue is definitely not just limited to Nintendo. So, let's talk DLC. DLC is exactly what the name suggests. Extra content you can download onto your game. You can either access DLC by paying for it, or it can be given to players for free in the form of content updates. And it's a concept that's been around for quite some time with Nintendo. Back in 1995, the Satellaview was a peripheral produced by the Super Famicom, which is the Japanese version of the Super Nintendo. The Satellaview had 1 megabytes of ROM and 512 kilobytes of RAM, and it allowed players to download games via satellite broadcast. These games included Famicom, the Japanese version of the NES, and Super Famicom games that were given a new coat of paint, games like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda, with a few exclusive games as well. In exchange for a monthly subscription fee, these games were offered within a specific time frame through satellite broadcasts, instead of the traditional physical cartridges, which means many of these games are lost to the sands of time. But for many Nintendo fans, they will remember that DLC in its more traditional form was first explored on the Nintendo DS and Wii with the arrival of the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. This was a pretty big deal for Nintendo, and with it we saw downloadable items for games like Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon on the Nintendo DS, and item and pattern distributions for Animal Crossing, City Folk on the Wii. These ideas would later expand on the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U. Games like Fire Emblem Fates would have brand new DLC storylines available to purchase. Animal Crossing New Leaf would receive a massive free update with new items and content. And New Super Mario Bros. U would receive a separate Luigi-themed version as DLC. Now, beyond paid and free DLC, DLC can be further divided into 3 subgroups. DLC, and when I consider done correctly, includes live service DLC, games like Fortnite that players go into expecting. But then you have supplemental DLC, which is a nice extra to an already fleshed out game. Some great examples of supplemental DLC are Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, both games released on the Nintendo Switch, and filled with loads of great content to keep fans satisfied. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate included 76 fighters on release, and in the years following, we received DLC in the form of Fighters Pass Volumes 1 and 2, where an additional 13 fighters and other content were released in phases during that time. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe does it even better. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on release included 36 racers, or 37 if you count Gold Mario, and 48 race courses. But in March of 2022, we received the first wave of 6 of the Booster Course DLC Pass. This DLC includes 48 additional race courses, mostly classic race courses, which is to release in 6 waves of 8 race courses to the end of 2023, increasing the game total number of race courses to 96. In addition to the race courses, starting with Waves 4 release, the DLC Pass also features additional playable racers. Birdo was the first to be added to the roster, and fans can expect at least 5 more racers to be added, starting with PD Piranha, Kamek, and Wiggler, which will be included in Wave 5. To me, this is DLC overload, and they should just give us Mario Kart 9 at this point, but I'll never complain about more content. The Fighters Passes and Booster Course Pass is DLC done right. DLC that is offered to give loyal players a little something extra once they've done everything there is to do in a game. But lately it seems like Nintendo has been focusing more on the wrong type of DLC, and that's Vital DLC. Vital DLC is content that feels like it was supposed to be included in the base game and was delivered after the launch of an underwhelming and what feels like an unfinished game, only then making it feel complete, or somewhat complete anyways. Let's go through some examples of Vital DLC by shitting on some of the most recent Mario sports games. Mario Strikers Battle League launched on the Nintendo Switch, feeling unfinished in its range of content, being one of the only Mario sports games that launched without single-player content that was distinct from the multiplayer gameplay. The game also launched with only 10 playable players in 5 stadiums, a significant drop from the game's predecessor, Mario Strikers Charged on the Wii, which included 12 captains, 8 sidekicks, and 10 stadiums at launch. Then there's Mario Golf Super Rush, another Mario sports game that launched on the Nintendo Switch feeling unfinished, especially when compared to its predecessor, Mario Golf Toadstool Tour on the GameCube. What I loved about Toadstool Tour is all the extra content and modes that were included, like Ring Shot, Birdie Challenge, Mirror Pin, and Club Shots. The game was released bursting with content, and while Super Rush has a story mode unlike the other Mario Golf games, it wasn't enough to make up for the lack of content and bare-bone courses at its launch. Seriously, the courses all look like a copy and paste from one another with only the background being changed. To me, a game like Super Rush should not need 4 different versions to flesh out the game. Nintendo Switch Sports was another disappointment. Wii Sports was a complete game at launch with both single and multiplayer content, whereas the Switch sequel had to launch with the promise of having more sport types added in the future, and lacked modes outside of the ones you play online or locally with friends. So far, the only sport added as part of DLC is golf, which you think would be included in the game at its launch, considering it was in the original. One huge addition to the game is Sportsmates, a new sort of avatar, and the customization options included with them, allowing players to personalize their avatars on a deeper level than what was available in the Wii Sports series. However, these customization options are only available if the player has an active Nintendo Switch Online subscription, instead of just being included from the very start, as one would expect them to be. Even Mario Party Superstars, a game I personally love, felt lacking when it came to the number of characters and boards included. The lacking character selection I'm not so bothered by, but to only include 5 boards is disappointing, considering the boards are all just remastered versions from the N64 games, and that most of the Mario Party games at least have 6 boards. Data miners did find files for extra boards in the game, but for some reason, such an amazing game never received DLC. Maybe Nintendo felt the Mario sports games needed more support. The thing about live service multiplayer games that often have a competitive element like Fall Guys or Splatoon receiving live service DLC is that the DLC is the main draw of the game. Players go into these games expecting and excited to watch them grow and evolve over time. But for games like Mario Strikers Battle League, Mario Golf Super Rush, and Nintendo Switch Sports, they're perceived as party games for primarily local multiplayer experiences that have extras for solo players to experience on their own. So the absence of content at launch for these titles makes them feel less like a continually supported game, and more like an unfinished game released in time to meet a deadline that developers plan to finish post-launch, which ultimately just leads to disappointment. But there's one game that is the most disappointing of them all, and that's Animal Crossing New Horizons. I will say I absolutely love New Horizons, which is why I was so disappointed with the DLC the game got. New Horizons launched at the beginning of the pandemic, a time where people were forced to lock down at home. The timing couldn't have been better, because at a time when there was very little people could do to occupy themselves, people didn't realize, or just didn't care, that New Horizons launched in a bare-bones state, with many series staples from the game prior missing. Over the course of the game's first year, Nintendo added a ton of stuff that was there at launch for previous titles and disguised them as free updates, when really they were just adding things that should have been there from the beginning. Things like Red and his shop, Pascal, Gulliver, Jack, Jingle, and other significant characters, as well as their associated events like Halloween and Toy Day, the art gallery in the museum. And for some reason, it took 12 updates for them to finally add the Roost coffee shop, because if there was any update to get people back into New Horizons, it was this guy. Nintendo set up New Horizons as a game that would be supported with years of new content, but the free updates were weak and added nothing significant. And after the first year, the updates became more scarce until they dropped the game completely. I understand developers sometimes need to use vital DLC, as there are other factors at play, like publicity pressure or studios forcing early deadlines for the holidays. But in the past few years, there's been too many games feeling unfinished at launch. And if this trend of developers relying on vital DLC and launching out unfinished games continues, then soon enough, it could discourage players from purchasing games at launch, as they won't expect them to be a finished product. And low sales, in turn, may discourage Nintendo from producing new titles, as sales wouldn't accurately reflect consumer interest, which could be detrimental to the franchises people love so much. But what do we know?